Fall is gone. I'm really sad about that. And Christmas is coming. Now, it's the time of year to make wish lists. And this video is my wish list of all the different things that I would love to see implemented into cameras to make them better for astrophotography. That's mainly what I do on this channel. Now, I do want to make one thing very clear up front, and that's that this video is not a complaining session. If you do complain about something, in my opinion, it should be something that happened at least 10 years ago. I even did a video like that once where I talked about all the things that I thought Olympus has done wrong over the years, but everything in that video was at least 10 years ago. And why? Well, it may turn out that someday you may realize that you were wrong, and we wouldn't want to be that person. Now, this is something that Olympus cameras have, and it's really one of the nicest intervalometers that is in any manufacturer out there. It's one of the reasons why I recommend their cameras. So in the first shooting menu, all the way at the bottom, you'll see there's an option here to go into the intervalometer. You can turn it on and then go into more details. You can record how many, you can tell it how many pictures, how much interval you want in between each. And this is fantastic, except for one thing, and that's that it only lets you go to a 60-second exposure. I would love to get this to go to up to 10 minutes even, because really in astrophotography, when we're taking lots of pictures and stacking them together, 60 seconds is way too short. So that would be my number one thing that I would ask for, is the ability to, with the intervalometer, use longer shutter speeds. Now, I have figured out a way around this using a tethering option to Olympus's capture software, but it means you got to use a laptop. Now, in astrophotography, focus is incredibly critical. We even have special masks that we put over our camera lenses so that we can check stars to make sure that they are absolutely perfect. Now, Olympus has built into some of their newer cameras this really cool feature called Starry Sky Autofocus, and it works fantastic, I'll tell you. There are two different versions, a fast one, which is designed for handheld work, and then there's a slower one, which is really for when you're on a tripod or some sort of tracking mount. And I always recommend using the slower option since it is more precise. It will go back and forth a couple times and check. And it basically uses the half-width full maximum size of the star in order to get focus. Now, right now, you can only do the Starry Sky autofocus at the very beginning of your imaging session. But as you know, temperatures throughout the night tend to drop a lot. And because of that, different materials, different elements, different types of glass will swell or shrink at varying rates, and therefore will cause focus to shift. What I would love to see is the ability to, in the intervalometer, program it such that it would check Starry Sky autofocus maybe every so many frames. You could maybe tell it to do it every 5 frames or every 10 frames or every 100 frames. Just another way for you to make sure that your night isn't wasted, so that you don't come back out and find out that, oh, only the first 20 pictures were sharp and then after that everything was blurry because, well, the lens got cold and your point of focus shifted. So my third thing that I would wish for, and it actually again has to do with the intervalometer that is built into this camera. Yeah, this intervalometer is fantastic, but there's so many things that could be done to make it even better for deep sky astrophotography. Now, in our sensors, there's this thing called pattern noise. And to illustrate this, I have a piece of junk here. Think of this as being a pattern that's on your sensor, and it's basically invisible, okay? In a regular picture, you'll never see it. But as we stack together many, many frames and we start to average them together, this will start to show up as we stretch the picture. And the way we can, there's actually a really simple way though to get rid of it, okay? And no, this pattern noise cannot be gotten rid of by using any type of calibration frame. No number of darks or flats or dark frames or bias frames will ever get rid of pattern noise. It's kind of a mystery as to how it's there, but it's there. But here's what we do. In astrophotography, what astrophotographers have found is that if we move the sensor around a little bit, every so many pictures, so we take a couple pictures and we move it, we take a couple more pictures and we move it, and we do this in a random fashion. And then when we're stacking the images, if we stack lining up based on the stars and not the edges of the frame of the sensor, this completely gets rid of pattern noise. And it's really awesome. It will make your pictures look so much better if you can dither. Now, right now, dithering is really hard. You need all the software that's connected to your mount, and it's just freaking complicated, okay? For people who are just starting out, I would love to see this feature built in as an option right into the intervalometer, that you can dither the frames, so many pixels moving the sensor around, using the image stabilizer of the Olympus cameras to basically do this for you. And this would make it incredibly easy for the average Joe or Jane to dither. So another little feature that I would love to have, and once again, this has to do with the intervalometer. Yes, I get excited about these things. Think of the possibilities, right? The LCD screen or the EVF has to be on when the intervalometer is in use. Now, I always flip my LCD screen out and I use that because it keeps heat away from the camera body. You definitely don't want to use the EVF internally, because that will put heat internal into the camera, and heat is our biggest enemy in astrophotography. And yes, both of these things also drain the battery more. So being able to turn both of them off, or like have some sort of timer that they would kind of turn off during the process of taking images, I think would save battery life and also just make astrophotography better for us, especially if you're at a really dark sky site and everyone's like, turn off that white light over there, and it's your LCD screen that's on. Now, I just love my new backyard. I think it's beautiful. We have gorgeous sunsets here and sunrises in the mornings, and often I would love to take a panorama, but in order to do that with one of my Olympus cameras, I have to go to software on the computer and do it. And you know, for probably 15 years now, my stupid cell phone has been able to do this in the cell phone itself. And this is an incredibly popular feature. Why can't we have this in our cameras? You know, I know actually at one time Olympus was beginning to actually implement something similar to this, where it would give you boundary zones on the edges of the picture. You had to overlap by so much, and then later on in the computer you could combine them together. But I would still love to see it in the actual camera, just to be able to take a picture, take a picture, take a picture, and using the motion detecting mechanisms that are in these things, the gyroscopes, to really stitch together a fantastic image. We can do it with our cell phones. Why can't we do it with an SLR or mirrorless camera? A couple of years ago, before we had our Pen F, which my wife now takes pictures of the kids with, she sent me a picture of our son, and it had this great shallow depth of field, bokeh as we call it, which I am standing in front of right now. And at first I thought she was using one of my bigger cameras, and I was like, congratulations, honey. And she's like, no, I took that with a cell phone. She had just discovered the portrait mode that is on these cell phones now, which kind of draws an outline around people and gives you shallower depth of field. Now, with the cell phones, it doesn't look that great. And that's because they're pushing it like 5, 7, sometimes 8 stops of, you know, artificial depth of field or shallow depth of field. All I would want really is maybe 1 or even just 2 stops. And I know it's possible, especially with the new IMX sensor that is in the OM1, but even with like the lower end cameras, if we just got 1 stop, I think it's one of those things that would kind of take some of the bite out of people who say, oh, you need a 35mm sensor in order to look professional because you need this bokeh back here, all this Tony effect, as we call it. And by the way, if you're a professional and you're telling your clients that, oh, the reason why you should buy my photos is because I can give you the shallow depth of field, guess what? You're not going to be in business much longer, because this is coming to every cell phone. Every cell phone now has it, and more people are seeing it, and it's getting better with each iteration of the software. So it is coming. It's eventually going to get to cameras. I hope that Olympus is the first ones to do it. Now, the OI Share app, or is it the OM Share app now? It's really come a long ways. It's getting better, all right? But still, in other manufacturers too. Everybody's guilty of this. Connecting your camera to your phone is a pain in the butt. It's too many steps. You got to go through all these settings, and you got to scan this barcode on the back of your screen. And I can't tell you how many times I've been at the park doing wildlife photography with the other people that are there, and I've seen guys get their cell phone out and take a picture of the LCD screen of the picture they just took and send that to their friends and say, look at this picture I just took, because connecting the app is such a pain in the butt. Now, this is my DJI gimbal, okay? It's not connected right now. I am just going to simply start the app, all right? And it's connected, just like that. That's all there was to it. So it is possible for this to be less painful. Now, these cameras now have Wi-Fi built into them. All of them have Wi-Fi built into them, and Bluetooth too. And do you remember the old iPod Touch days? You know, those things were not cell phones, okay? But all they had in them was Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and some of the later models actually had a camera built into them. And you could upload your pictures to the cloud through Wi-Fi with them seamlessly. It was super easy. You can even take pictures with your iPod Touch and load them to Instagram and so forth. I would love to see that built into a camera. Why can't I have like a Facebook, an Instagram, and maybe a Flickr app kind of like built into this thing so that I can connect to my account and upload a picture that I like? And no, it doesn't have to have like the ability to write text and caption it and tag people and stuff like that. I could open my phone afterwards and then actually edit it there. I think using a keypad on these touch screens would just be too laborsome. Basically, just the ability to upload my pictures to the cloud. And actually, Chris Nichols over at DP Review, I like that guy, he suggested the same thing, that like, why can't we, through Wi-Fi, have the ability to connect to like our home network or maybe our office places network and just upload stuff directly to cloud storage. And by the way, this could be a great way for the manufacturers to basically have a subscription system that they could kind of constantly generate revenue through. And oh yes, while we're talking about menus, the OM1 menu, it's fantastic. It really is. Transitioning to it has been the easiest thing ever, and I thought it would be very difficult to do because I'm so familiar with these menus, and I still use my E1X a lot. But despite that, yeah, the OM menu is great. Olympus, please put it in every single camera. Yes, a lot of people were upset about the OM5 not having it. That's just really kind of confirmation as to how good that menu system is. So you got something golden there. Let's go with it 100%. All right, so we're over here at my stump. I really wish this tree was still here. This was it gave the house a nice shade, but the previous owner cut it down. Anyways, let's talk about vignette and lens compensation controls. Now, Olympus was actually one of the pioneers of this way back in 2001. They were the first guys that started doing this, and nobody ever gives them credit for it either. But anyways, they started doing what was called vignette compensation. However, it's never really gone anywhere. Everybody's still kind of doing it the same way. And by the way, this isn't just Olympus. This is all the manufacturers are very two-year-old-ish amateurs when it comes to how they compensate for vignette in pictures. I would love to see each lens to have its own profile made at the factory. Now, especially maybe just pro lenses, because I know this would be kind of expensive to do. Like, you look at this stump hole, the center is not in the middle. And there's a reason for that, because, well, it's organic, it's nature. And these lenses, often the central bright point of the lens, you know, its image circle center, is not always centered perfectly. As a matter of fact, Rob Trek, my friend, he was up here, we were stretching his images the next day, and his vignette started to show up, and he's like, well, how can I compensate for this? I was like, well, you need to take flats, okay, proper flats. And he was also like, why is it off-centered? And I was like, yeah, your image circle is off-centered in the lens. Yeah, the 300mm f4, the Pro lens, it was off-centered. It was off-centered by, I think, about 2.5 millimeters on the image sensor, which, you know, is about 10%. Yeah, that was quite a bit, okay? So I would love to see at the factory, well, maybe like at least the Pro lenses, calibrated such, and then loaded into a chip that's inside these lenses, because I know they have computer chips in them, so that when it's connected to the camera, that camera knows exactly how that lens performs with both its vignette and also the exact center of its vignette. Now, everything that I've talked to you about so far has been about software, stuff that could be changed through a firmware update. From now on, we're going to talk in this next big section about hardware changes that I would love to see, and these would have to come out in new models, obviously. Now, what you see here, this is a chart that I've kind of quickly drawn up on my whiteboard. It's the UV IR cut filter transmission spectrum of the majority of cameras out there. Now, all the way to the left here, we have ultraviolet, which is of course beyond visible, and then we have blue, green, red, and then infrared right here. Now, at the top of the chart, we see we have 100%, and then of course down here, of course, would be 0% transmission. Camera manufacturers, they put over every single sensor an UV IR cut filter, which basically rejects light that is beyond what our eyes can see. So that way it looks natural, okay? And it mostly looks like this. Blue and green are basically at 100%. Now red, once you get into the oranges, they start to drop drastically. And this is universal across pretty much all the manufacturers. And down here at the very end of the red, it's really, really handicapped. You're not getting very much red. And that's because our eyes aren't very sensitive to red anyways. Now, in astronomy though, there's like these little tiny bands in the rainbow, so to speak. So this being our rainbow, blue at this end, red at this end. There's these little tiny spots where light comes through, and it's very, very specific. So there's actually like a small one right about here, more towards blue, but in between the blue and the green. That's oxygen 3, okay? And then over here, there's a really big one, okay? And it's called hydrogen, okay? 95% of the universe is hydrogen. And almost all of our astrophoto images is made up of hydrogen. It's the big boy in the room. And then of course right next to it is sulfur, which is smaller. And then there's a couple of other little, there's a hydrogen beta way over here. There's one a little bit further out down here. And I think there's one right in here. Actually, no, it's not over the green. It's like more over in the yellow area. But yeah, these are the two big boys, okay? And unfortunately, the UV IR cut filters of our cameras rejects like 60% of that light. And it means that you take a huge handicap using a regular daytime camera to take astrophotos. What I would love to see is basically an altered UV IR cut filter. And this would be a UV IR cut filter that would not in any way harm a camera's ability to take daytime astrophotos, because you've often probably heard of people they modify their camera. They actually remove this filter completely from their camera so they can get all of this. Well, once you do that, well, you can't use it in daytime photography because the white balance is all screwed up. Well, what I would love to see, I'm going to signify this with the black line here, is I want to see like a little gap in the UV IR cut filter right there, right where hydrogen is, all right? And what that would do is that would just let in that little sliver of light. It only needs to be a couple nanometers wide, probably about 5 or 6 nanometers wide. And then you could continue rejecting all the light that's around it. And this tiny little sliver wouldn't really affect its performance in the daytime. It would still have the same white balance effects. But at the same time, in astrophotography, it would have huge benefits, okay? And it would automatically, every single camera that you make with a UV IR cut filter with these two gaps, so to speak. So we have our main gap over here, and then this tiny little sliver right over here. It would cover everybody. Astrophotographers would be covered, and then your general daytime photography would be covered. And it wouldn't be something that would have to be specialized. You wouldn't have to make special little batches. You could just do everybody this way. All right, that's my little idea for the UV IR cut filter. Now this next one that I'm going to talk to, this would probably seem like it could be software done, and it is software based. But I know right now that this would require a lot of additional RAM, or at least memory in the camera to store things permanently in order to do this. And what I'm talking about is basically a built-in darks library or darks compensation system. Now right now, most cameras, they have to take a dark frame and then take a picture when you've got that feature activated. And I usually tell people to turn it off because, you know, obviously it cuts your imaging time at night in half. Better off to take your darks at another time. Well, darks are actually really predictable, and they're basically based on two different things. So we've got my chart here. So one of these is time, and then the other one is temperature. All right. And basically every single pixel, okay, can actually be graphed in a two-dimensional way. So as time gets longer, all right, obviously thermal noise goes up, which is what darks are compensating for. But also as temperatures go up, all right, so does thermal noise. They go up at the same rate. Now every single pixel, they kind of react a little differently. I don't want to nerd out on you too much here, but basically what you can do is a camera, let's say while the camera is charging, it could basically measure itself constantly. Basically take all these different, internally, take all these different dark frames and measure at different lengths of time, different temperatures, and basically build this graph where you basically just move them back and forth, and you could plot and get exactly where at this given time, at this given temperature, the pixel will perform in this way, and essentially give you better high ISO performance. And this could be applied to everything, not just astrophotography, but also daytime photography. And I even did a video once where I showed, like, I basically took calibration frames using the OM1, and I got a better picture. It was amazing. The noise was in fact lower by doing these calibration frames that were a lot more significant than what's built into the camera. I love those little switches. Your Pro-End cameras, they have 2 card slots, and we're getting into this thing now where, like, cards just aren't fast enough to keep up with these new sensors. But I know I have some computers, like I have an old Mac Pro, and it's got 3 hard drives in it that are rated together. And it doesn't give me 3 times the speed, but it's a lot faster because of that RAID system. And one thing I would love to propose, and I don't know if this would be hardware based or if it could be entirely done with software through like a firmware update, and that's the ability to RAID 2 cards together such that basically it would write a picture to one, then write a picture to the other one, then write a picture to one, then write a picture to the other one, so that you could get basically your buffer would be cleared out twice as fast almost. So just a little idea. Now this idea is just more of a, I want the manufacturers to just do better, okay? This is a battery grip. It's for my EM1 Mark III. I have 2 of these. I've bought a battery grip for every camera that I have ever owned. If it has a battery grip available, I buy one, period. Now, battery grips, I just feel like the manufacturers don't do a very good job with these things. And I'm not saying they're badly designed, they don't ask enough, okay? They don't do enough. All they do is perform portrait mode kind of grip, and they give you an extra battery, and that's it, okay? And really, there's so much more that I think could be done with these things. For example, this is an element that you're adding onto your camera that could potentially have another processor in it that would allow you to maybe take faster frame rates, or maybe process higher bitrate video or something like that. And it could handle the heat essentially. Also, why can't we have like additional ports on these things? Like maybe have a full-size HDMI port built into a battery grip. Like we could have 2 battery grips, one that's dedicated more towards video, and then another one that's more like towards still photography. I think stuff like that would make battery grips more appealing to people, and probably more people would buy them, rather than them just being something that there's a few extra buttons on and a battery stuck into for a little extra battery life. You know, that's not really an appealing reason to get a battery grip. But if it was to somehow supercharge your camera and make it faster, I think a lot more people would want to buy one of these. You know, it's kind of like, what does every teenager do when they buy a new car? They buy some chrome for it or some bigger rims or something like that. You know, and photographers are kind of the same way, really. I love flippy screens, all right? This is our Pen F. And I don't see why every camera should not have a flippy screen. But there's one thing that's always annoyed me a little bit, and that's that I can't spin it 360. And I know I'm asking a bit. There's wires that go through here and so forth, but there are connectors out there that allow you to run both data and power that could potentially give you the ability to spin one of these things 360 degrees infinitely. And that's kind of something that I would like, because there are so many times when I'm putting this thing away and I got to flip it back, and I flipped it the wrong way. Now I got to go back the other ways. And it's a little bit of a nuisance, and it slows me down, especially when I'm trying to work quickly or I'm in the dark or something like that and I can't see which way it's already oriented. So yeah, I would love to see a 360 degree spinning LCD screen. Behind me is my old gun cabinet, which has now been turned into my camera library. It's got about 10 different cameras in there, all of them Olympus cameras. And I want to talk to you about what I think the ultimate camera should look like. All right, and yes, there's no lie, I think it should come kind of similar to the EM1X. I just did a video kind of explaining why it doesn't seem to have been a failure. I think it looks like it was a success, actually. And I can't tell you how many people I have had comment on that video and say, yes, for them, it was the best camera they've ever owned, and they still love it and they miss it. They've upgraded to the OM1, many of them, but there's just something about the EM1X that they love. And a lot of it has to do, of course, with the ergonomics. That the biggest complaint that was lodged against the EM1X was its size, okay? Now, it is a little bit wider than their other cameras, and it is a little bit thicker. But believe it or not, when you make a camera wider or thicker, for some reason people don't mind that. They don't consider that an issue. I've had people walk up to me with an old DSLR, which was way thicker, okay? I mean, we're talking like an inch thicker than this guy was, and they say, oh, this is the same size. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's like twice the volume. But for some reason, if a camera's taller, that's what gets people, okay? And we all know the OM1 has a new battery. So here's my wish with the new one. And it's possible, I think, because of the new OM1 battery. I've got one right here. Let's pull out an older one to compare. As you can see, the older battery, it's a good bit taller. Now the EM1X, its batteries were set on its side, and because of that, that actually required this camera to be a little bit taller. And that's because it's got to miss basically all the electronics and the image stabilization system that is basically a fixed size. Now, with the OM1 batteries though, if they were to implement that into it, I think that this camera could actually get quite a bit shorter and maybe even get it down to the same height or even maybe a little bit less than a standard OM1 with a battery grip attached. And I think if you could build a camera like that, that maybe, yes, it was still wider and yes, it was still a little bit thicker, but it was a little bit shorter or maybe the same height, then I don't think people would complain so much about the size of the EM1X or the OM1X. Because yes, I would love to see an OM1X someday. That would be my dream camera. Now, of course, I would love to see 2 processors in it, maybe even 3. All right, so this is my OM4, all right? The EVF in these things is just so big and gorgeous. The OM1 EVF is better, okay? It really is a big improvement over the old one. It's still, I still wish for more though, okay? And if Olympus were to make an OM1X, I would love to see an even larger view through the EVF and also a higher resolution view. I know that there is actually a 9 megapixel electronic viewfinder out there, which Sony actually uses in, I think, the A1. That is 9 megapixels. It would be fantastic, incredibly crisp and clear, and it is capable of 120 frames per second, or even faster, I think. but it needs a really fast graphics processing unit in order to run at that speed. And I know with certain feature sets in place with the A1, you can't use it at that high frame rate. And of course, it's been some years though. I think Olympus, they put 2 processors in a camera. I think that they could do it, that they could use that 9 megapixel EVF and basically still get that incredibly high crisp speed that we get with the OM1. So that would be my wish for the EVF, and that would kind of set it further apart, because I don't want them to come out with an OM1X that's got the same EVF as the OM1. I don't think that's going to be enough of a market differentiation for people to recognize it as better. And then another thing that I would love to see is a larger LCD screen on the back, with this camera being wider, the EM1X being wider, and potentially an OM1X if it was the same width. I would just love to see a bigger LCD screen. You know, it's a professional camera, and just to be able to like zoom in and just have a nicer image. And also, it needs to be good in the daytime. I know there are LCD screens out there that are bright enough to be seen in the day. That is something that I've been wanting for a long time, since digital cameras first came out, really. And it's been 20 years now, and I still haven't seen a digital camera yet that I could take out in the daytime and not have to like shield it in order to be able to see the picture. Now, one other thing, and this is universal across all of the camera companies out there, they all do this. They all make the logic board. It's long. It goes across the back of the camera. And unfortunately, they always put the freaking processor right behind where the image sensor is. Now, in astrophotography, this is terrible for us because it means that a lot of heat is generated right behind the sensor, and that creates thermal noise. With this guy, though, there's no battery in this portion of the camera anymore, so I would love to see those processors moved into this section and just kind of off of the image sensor area, and hey, maybe that would even let you make it a little bit thinner. All right, so one other little thing that I would love to see, this is one of my dedicated mono cameras, and this guy has basically a Peltier cooler that's attached to the image sensor, and then it's got this big heat grate here and a fan in it that essentially wisps heat away from the sensor and allows us to drop the temperature of the sensor. And news for you guys, anytime you drop the temperature of a sensor, they always perform better. Even when doing high frame rate video, you're doing very short exposures, you will see an improvement in performance. And as a matter of fact, when I was reading the manual for the EM1 Mark III here, good grief, I think like 8 different times in the first chapter, they mentioned more heat will generate more noise. So if the engineers are aware of this, I would love to see that wisp. I know this guy right here, he had a heat tube in him that whisked heat away from the processor and dumped it into the body. I would love to see this taken even a step further. That's what we call a passive cooling system. This right here is an actively cooled sensor, and what it does is it takes the sensor and it gets it to a specific temperature, and then it holds it at that spot. And for us in astrophotography, as we take one picture after another, to have the sensor at the exact same temperature the entire night is a great benefit to us, because it means that we can just take one string of dark frames and use those, rather than having a massive library of different dark frames to choose from to like try and calibrate specifically to each picture based on their temperature. And it wouldn't need to be huge. I mean, like this guy here, he can do 45 degrees Celsius of delta, okay? In other words, he can take the ambient temperature and drop it by 45 degrees. I'm not asking for that, okay? 5 degrees would be plenty, you know, maybe 10. So that would be one of my, if that was built into an OM1X, I would just be like ecstatic. I would buy 3. And another thing is buffer limit, and I think some of this could be addressed, of course, maybe by doing a rated card system. But yeah, I would love an OM1X to have either a massive buffer or basically no buffer limit whatsoever. And I don't know if that means that we need to switch to CF Express. don't like the idea of switching to those. I know UHS 3 is coming out now. Maybe we could see that in the next camera. That would be kind of my more preferred path, but I don't know where the rest of the camera industry is going. Comment about that below. Tell me what you think. Now, the last thing about the sensor that I would love to see is, yes, I would like to see a megapixel count increase, but only if I could have this one feature kind of melded into it or built into the hardware of the sensor. Now, there's already a sensor kind of like this out there, and for a while people thought the Olympus was going to use it. I think it's the IMX492 sensor, and it's a 4/3 sensor, and it's a 40 megapixel sensor, all right? It can do 8K video. But it also has the ability to bin down 2x2. In other words, it would combine groups of 2x2 or sets of 4 pixels into one. And as a result, it has the ability to shoot in very low light conditions at 10 megapixels. And that is something that I would love to see as an option in the camera, where for most day-to-day use, we can use it at 40 megapixels, and then at any time when you're shooting in really low light, especially nature photographers, I know would enjoy this, the ability to go down to 10 megapixels and then shoot it, basically 4 times the sensitivity, because you'd have 4 times the pixel area. Because really, in the end, folks, sensor size doesn't matter. It's pixel size is what depends on your low light performance. Pixel size. And then, oh, you know what? I just remembered something I forgot. I'm going to talk about it now. I would love to see more special features in these cameras that are combinable. So, for example, we have high-res shot mode, which we're talking about higher megapixels. That's why I thought of this. I would love to be able to combine high-res shot mode with focus stacking and to do it in camera. Now, I know I wouldn't expect to be able to maybe stack 15 frames at 80 megapixels together. That would take an enormous amount of time to process, even if you have 2 TruePic X processors in an OM1X. But like, even if I could just stack maybe 3 focus stacked images together at 80 megapixels, I think that would be pretty cool. Just to start kind of seeing more of these features be able to cross-talk and kind of like work together as a group. Maybe be able to combine high-res mode with HDR mode, or to combine HDR mode with image focus stacking mode, things like that. Just so that you have more options of things to choose from, and just to really take computational photography even further. And of course, the last piece of advice that I have for any manufacturer who decides to watch this video, I don't care who you are, if you're Canon, Nikon, or Leica, or Fuji, look at cell phones. Look at what the apps in these cameras can do. And really, this is kind of a great way for you to look at the market and say, okay, what kind of things are people putting into photography apps that are on these phones that people are interested in and that they're using? And maybe use that as kind of your market research and development drive to kind of test things out. Test your feet in the water before you actually dedicate time to putting this into a camera, because lots of people will write apps for these things on their own time for free, and sometimes they're a flop and sometimes they're a huge success. And I think looking at cameras and maybe cell phones are, let's face it, on a computational scale, they're way ahead of cameras, and camera manufacturers would do themselves a great deal of favor if they looked at the apps that are on cell phones and said, here's a feature we could stick into our camera, there's another feature we could stick into our camera, and start doing that. And that way I think you'll have a higher success rate. I'm going to pack up all this stuff now and put it back in the cabinet over there. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have ideas of your own, please comment on them below. I would love to hear your ideas. I'm not the person who thinks of everything.